Welcome to another edition of the LudoKit Devlog. Today we're talking about 0.0.41, and specifically we're talking about a collection of updates to how contributor teams work for your credits system. So a credits team is basically a named group of contributors, and any contributor can be on one team. And it's basically an organizational layer for your credits where you can have some basically team-specific rules and specifications that'll impact what your export looks like, and what kind of warnings you get, that kind of stuff. And also can be used to manage permissions so that you can basically have different teams managed by different people, so that we can split the load and make sure the right people are doing the work without them being able to edit and manage every single part of credits. So again, each contributor belongs to one team. Okay, so we got some new features related to teams. So let's jump into them and take a look. So we already have this concept of pre-roll displays. This was already in here, but we don't have a devlog talking about it, so we'll talk about it while we're in here. So the idea of a pre-roll display is to say you've got, like in our case, our studio is called Butterscotch Shenanigans, so we're the primary dev team who makes our games, and so we might want to, before the credits roll, so our pre-roll credits, we might want to say, hey, this is a game by Butterscotch Shenanigans. And we might have a publisher, or we might have a co-developer, or whatever. So there are these handful of cases where we want to, before the actual credit details of who did what start to appear, we want to have those attributions for big picture stuff. Who's responsible for this game existing and that sort of thing. So LudoKit provides a handful of pre-configured ones, basically based on what we see really commonly in real game credits. And the idea is that by having these already figured out for you, then we can pre-localize them and then just give them to you in the languages that you need, and you never have to worry about that stuff. So that's nice, and of course you can just not have anything show up. So by default it's just set to none, except for the initial team that you start with. So every credits page starts with an initial team, which is just sort of mapped onto your organization itself, and that one defaults to a game by, because that's probably your common use case. So now I've got a new concept, where this is just added in this version, or one of the last two versions, which is this idea of a post-credits affiliation. So the IGDA recommends not separating out your credits, meaning who did what, by team, by organization, and instead to have all that stuff mixed together. So if you have external artists and you have internal artists, and you've got some person who did a little bit of art just to help out a little bit at some point, who's not really affiliated with anything, you don't want to be breaking out the art part across different organizations in your credits list. Instead, you just want to have a section called art with a list of all the people who did art, keeping it very simple. But, of course, people still like to have their affiliations actually represented in the credits in some way, and the companies who are doing the stuff, who are organizing all those people, also want to be attributed. And so rather than trying to break up credits by organization, the idea is instead just show all the credits, and then, optionally, for any given organization whose members you want to list, so that people viewing the credits know who makes up your team, right? That just gets listed separately, independently, in addition to your individual credits. So then the idea would be that in my case, for like my team would always be Butterscotch Shenanigans, that's our studio name, then I would show up alongside any of our third-party contributors who helped out do programming stuff or whatever. I would just show up in the same place in the credits. After the credits roll, there'll be a section called Butterscotch Shenanigans, and underneath that will be my name plus the name of everybody else on my team. So that's the idea. However, you don't always want that to be the case, so you might want to have a team not show up. So the idea here would be members of this team, contributors that are part of this team, will still be credited. They'll still show up with their roles and be listed amongst everybody else. But there will not be a post-credits listing for this particular team that has the name of the team plus all the members that make it up. So you want to use this in cases where a contributor is a team. So, for example, in our case, we work with an independent studio called Fat Bard for all of our music, and they prefer to be credited just as Fat Bard, and so it doesn't make sense to have their team, which is called Fat Bard, and then their one credit, which is named Fat Bard, show up independently. Anyway, it doesn't make any sense to do that. So there are cases like that, or cases where you just don't want to show team names. And again, like all this just impacts how LudoKit exports stuff for you and where it identifies issues. Because if you say, for example, that you're not going to list this post-credits affiliation and you're not going to do any pre-roll display, then that means that this name, this team name, will never appear in the credits. And therefore, LudoKit doesn't have to check it to make sure that your fonts cover it, for example. So, and then also in the export itself, it'll then just skip over those sections. So that's the idea with those things. So by default, your post-credits affiliation will just be the same as the team. But you can also set it to none to have it not appear, or you can say, actually, I want to have this team appear as this other team. So this would be the idea where if just for convenience you're using LudoKit credits teams to manage differential access or having different rules for different groups of people or whatever, then you can still, once they get into the post-credits affiliations list, just list all those people under the same heading, under the same team name, rather than having a whole bunch of like Butterscotch Shenanigans artists or whatever, that kind of stuff listed. So that's the idea of that. So that gives you a lot of flexibility for the various places that stuff can show up. And then the other new stuff is that you can set minimum and maximum roles, and these are sort of soft rules that allow LudoKit to inform you as the credits manager on your team that there are people within this team, so development in this case, that there are people within this team who have too few roles or too many roles. By default, there is no max, so somebody could add 30 roles if they wanted to. And usually you don't need to specify this, but for convenience, you might want to set it to 5 or something fairly reasonable. But by default, there's no max. And by default, the minimum is 1, meaning that LudoKit will show an error for any credit that doesn't have any roles, because the assumption is that that's a mistake and that because that person, if they don't have any roles, won't show up in the credits, though they could still be listed in the post-credits affiliation. But if they don't have a role, they can't be credited as having a role, so they won't show up in the main credits. Since that's probably a mistake, the default is to assume that it is, but you can come in here and override that and say, actually, no, people can have 0 roles, and that's totally fine. Can't have -1 roles, though. So people can have 0 roles, and that's totally fine. And in that case, that would allow you to say, yeah, my members of this team won't show up in the main credits, but I'll still have them show up in the post-credits affiliation. This is the kind of thing that you'll see with some publishers, so Devolver Digital is the one that I've noticed the most, where rather than listing out the individual roles in the credits for everybody involved with publishing for a game that Devolver Digital publishes, they instead just, in sort of the post-credits section, just have Devolver Digital and then just a list of all the names, which is basically a post-credits affiliation. And so if you have people with no roles but some affiliation, then they'll all be listed at the end, even though they aren't shown in the main credits. So that handles that use case. And then in the case that you want to force that use case, then you can also set max roles to 0. And that way, if the min is 0 and the max is 0, nobody can have any roles. And now you've basically made a team who will show up in the post credits, but whose members won't appear in the actual main credits listing. So again, these are soft rules. So LudoKit will adjust its exports and adjust its error messages depending on what you set these to, but will otherwise treat these as soft rules so that if somebody is below the minimum or above the maximum that you set, that doesn't prevent them from being exported or anything like that, except in the case where they have 0 when 0 is allowed. They otherwise won't be prevented from being exported. So that way you've got a lot of flexibility, and mostly what LudoKit is trying to do is trying to draw your attention to stuff that seems like it's probably unintended, but otherwise try to give you enough flexibility that you can still do the kind of stuff that you want. So that's the new stuff with how credits teams work. I guess I'll also mention while I'm in here that credits teams also have this concept of a limited manager. This is somebody who is part of your organization, but who doesn't have rights to manage your credits in general. As in, they're part of your organization, but they don't have the right to add or to invite new people into the credits for any particular game. So LudoKit provides a role, which is a sort of credit management role that would allow a user who has it in your organization to fully manage any stuff related to your credits for any particular game, whatever game you say they have that access to. So that's a pretty blanket kind of permission. So the idea of a limited manager is that they have that, as in they can invite people, they can delete people from the credits, they can approve a credit, they can do that kind of stuff, but only within a specific team, a specific credits team within your credits. So you can use this feature to say, if you work with a third party for localization, you could invite the project manager from that team into your organization, give them limited permissions so that they can manage a team for their localization company, and then let them deal with all the stuff of making sure they add all their team and deal with all that stuff properly. So that's that idea. And I think that is everything on this topic. So I'll be kicking out another video in a second here to talk about the other new feature as part of this most recent set of versions, which is adding people using a link. So I hope you're still interested in LudoKit. This was informative. And if you've got any feedback, check out the Discord and let me know.